Hello and welcome to Channels Book Club. I am Olakunle Kasumu. Coming up today is a conversation with a German gentleman who has spent much time in Nigeria and written about the country, touching on sensitive political and social subjects. Also coming up are two reports. One is on the Nigeria Prize for Literature 2019, and the other is about a man who is running from Lagos to Onitsha in support of an anti-piracy campaign. Please sit back and enjoy the show. Heinrich Bergstresser is a freelance journalist and an independent research associate at the German Institute of Global and Area Studies in Hamburg. He's also the author of many write-ups, articles, and a book on Nigeria titled A Decade of Nigeria: Politics, Economy, and Society, 2004 to 2016, among others. He joined us to discuss his experiences visiting, observing, and writing about Nigeria. He also briefly explored his book, A Decade of Nigeria. Enjoy this. Nice to have you on Channels Book Club. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Great. You've been, for many years, you've been visiting Nigeria, staying in Nigeria, researching Nigeria, writing about Nigeria. What prompted that?
You see, there are situations in life where a certain direction has been determined. And when I came as a student to Nigeria for the first time, that was almost 41 years ago.
41 years. Wow.
And at that time, after this long trip from south to north, from north down south again, east, southeast, I promised I will come back. It took some time, but then I spent a year in northern Nigeria. I got a grant, and then later on, when I had the chance to work for Radio Deutsche Welle, I came several times, and then I had an assignment of 4 years, but not with Deutsche Welle, but with a German NGO. So I stayed in the early 90s, I stayed in Nigeria for 4 years. But nevertheless, once Nigeria, forever Nigeria, and I can tell you, whether you believe it or not, there's no other country except Germany where I've spent so many times, so many years than in Nigeria.
In Nigeria. Whoa, we should give you a chieftaincy title.
Who knows?
Great, great. You've written a lot about Nigeria, and this is one of your books, A Decade of Nigeria, amongst quite a few. What has inspired you to write about Nigeria? Mostly you've written about the political and social angle to the country.
That's right. But I mean, you know, when you are dealing with African affairs, no matter Southern Africa, anti-apartheid movement, the fight, when you look at it, how people like Nkrumah, like Azikiwe and others were fighting for independence, and that was part and parcel, of course, of the curriculum. And so when I had the chance to visit several African countries, and I can say I know at least half of them. I stayed there, not just visited, I stayed there, and in most cases I worked there. Then, of course, Nigeria played a very prominent role. Not only because it's Nigeria. I mean, Nigeria stands for the most populous country in Africa. 1 in 5, 1 in 6 Africans are Nigerians. And the oil business, gas business, name it. I mean, the history is so complex, and the dynamics were so complex, to my understanding, even more complex than in those countries that I have visited. And I just, a few weeks ago, I spent 4 weeks in Kenya and went again to Zanzibar. And I could see, of course, things have changed, but the climate is nevertheless different. And today, after 2 weeks coming back from Kenya, I'm again here and visiting old friends and having discussions and also enjoying.
Reading a bit of your writings, one gets the impression that you seem to have a notion that Nigeria is a country with a lot of potential, a lot of wealth, a lot of blessings, but very uncertain. What's your take on that?
Yeah, you see, there are so many dichotomies in this country. I mean, even I would not know how many, but I know there are many. And to understand and analyze these dichotomies, I think maybe one needs another lifespan. But nevertheless, I think the parameters are still the same. North-South dichotomy, the poor, the rich, the super rich, and the vast ethnicity in this country, so many ethnic groups, so many languages, and at the same time you have the real tropical area in the coastal part of the country. You have the middle belt with a beautiful landscape, beautiful nature, and then you have the Sahel or the savannah that is almost part of the Sahel. And as I said, when I was in Nigeria for the first time, I even went to Lake Chad. Lake Chad at that time was already diminishing somehow, so to speak. But when I read today how small the Lake Chad has become, then one can see what climate change and climate aspects and, of course, dynamics of the demographic dynamic, what that can cause. So the dichotomies are still there, but nevertheless, people are moving forward. And what I learned over a long period of time, how the quantity of resilience that a society can develop over time, no matter what will happen on top of the country, no matter which government, etc. So the resilience is something that is remarkable, and this for me is the secret that this society is still existing and still moving somewhere. When you ask people, when I ask people in which direction, the answers are very vague, but nevertheless, everybody tries to somehow manage the daily affair, and this also keeps such a country together.
What's the biggest challenge you've had writing about Nigeria?
The sheer number of events, overwhelming number of events, and to sort out what is relevant, what is less relevant, what is irrelevant. This is a challenge by itself. So to find the parameters that are so important, that constitute the system of this society. And in this respect, I think that is a permanent challenge. It was not only a challenge some 30, 40 years ago. No, it's still a challenge. And I think that also makes a difference for me when I look at other countries in the world, or at least in Africa. I've also been in Latin America and in Asia. But nevertheless, my focus is on Africa and, of course, West Africa. And in this respect, I can still say or maintain the sheer number of events makes it quite difficult to find a proper...
Picking what to write, what not to write.
Right, exactly.
Incredible. A Decade of Nigeria. This is a compilation of Africa Yearbook contributions, right?
Correct, 2004 till 2016.
Tell me a bit more about this.
Yeah, I mean, this format was invented in 2004 from Brill University Press, together with an institution in Sweden and a German institution, the GIGA, that is formerly known as Institute for African Studies. It didn't belong to university. It still does not belong to university, but it's a kind of think tank, and quite often Nigerians also show up there and get either a grant or do their research or apply for publication of articles. Just recently, I saw in the scientific journal that, again, Nigerians are writing there and publishing there, and I can tell you 75% of all articles that are sent to be published in Africa are from Nigeria. Of course, not all of them will be published, but quite a lot on a frequent level. So these three institutes decided to establish an English published, an English written book, an annual yearbook about events in the whole of Africa, south of the Sahara. And there was a preliminary edition. It was in German that started several years back, but of course German language, not too many speak and read German. So it was a good indicator and a good chance to transform this German format into an English format with international writers from Africa, from Netherlands, from Leiden, famous Leiden University, from Britain, US, name them. So it's a real international entity, and so we are forced to keep a certain format: domestic politics, relevant domestic politics, foreign policy, and socio-economic development. And you have roughly 8,100, 8,200 words in English. Is quite a lot, but of course, it's a real compact article, and reading it is sometimes a bit, some people might get scared, because of course when you comprise so many events into such a short quite short article, then of course things look a bit, look a bit strange, but nevertheless this is just one part of it. And I think from what I hear, that even the big libraries all over the world, in the US, in the UK, etc., put that book into the library. It's a very expensive book, I must admit, very expensive, and in this respect, I think it's meant for libraries. And on the internet, you can buy single articles. I don't know, $10 or so, and then you get, let's say, the latest Nigerian version or the Ghanaian version. You pay $10, and then you can download the article. But the book itself, because it's more than just the countries, it also covers UN Africa relation, European African relation, etc., etc. So it's more than 400 pages every year.
Yeah. Great. I once had a mind-blowing experience at a library in Germany, Johannes Gothenburg University. Mm-hmm. Did I pronounce that right? Gothenburg University in Mainz.
Yes.
If it's an Institute of African Studies or something, somewhere in there. Amazing library of African literature. And I saw a lot of books that I had not seen here, written by Nigerian authors in that library. So it got me thinking, how much of an interest in African literature do Germans have?
Well, you must not forget that very many African literature written in French or English, preferably in English, has been translated into German. And therefore, in Germany, there's a big audience of books written by Nigerians, but also like the Kenyan writers, also others, at least as long as they write in English or French, what most of them do. But particularly when it comes to English production, very often it has been translated, mostly well translated, and so everybody then came to know Soyinka, who is still alive, or Achebe, who has passed away some years back. But nevertheless, these names are familiar, and so even the younger generation of authors like Chimamanda Adichie and others are well presented in Germany, well translated, and these people are also showing up to read, to make a kind of evening discussion about their stories, about their books. So there is a kind of audience that like and love African literature and, of course, Nigerian literature. So most of the authors, the older ones as well as the younger ones, are fairly well known. Of course, not a big audience, but several thousands of spectators and buyers and people who are buying books from these authors. So in this respect, there's a market. And of course, in Europe, there's a market. But when I look at your libraries today, I mean, when I compare it to those days when I came to Nigeria first. At that time, books had a value in itself. So the libraries were still, the university libraries, etc., bookshops existed. But this has come down now, and unfortunately, because reading and writing, I think this is part and parcel of any civilization, civilized process of mankind.
Thank you so much for joining us on Channels Book Club. Thanks for your time.
It's a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.